Imagine waking up one morning, loading your entire family onto a wooden boat, packing your seeds, your animals, and every single thing you own, and then sailing into an ocean so vast it covers a third of the planet. No map, no compass, no guarantee that land even exists on the other side. Most people would call that madness. These people called it Tuesday. We're talking about the Polynesians. And what they pulled off thousands of years ago is, without question, one of the most jaw-dropping achievements in all of human history. Not just sailing history, all of human history. They colonized islands scattered across an area bigger than Russia, using nothing but the stars above them, the waves beneath them, and a level of ocean knowledge that honestly makes modern sailors look like they're using training wheels. So today, we're going on a journey. We're going to trace exactly where these people came from, how they crossed thousands of miles of open water deliberately and successfully, and why modern science, with all its satellites and DNA labs, is still playing catch-up to what these ancient navigators already knew. Buckle up. This one's going to blow your mind. Let's start at the very beginning. And here's the part that surprises almost everyone when they first hear it. The story of the Polynesian people doesn't start in the Pacific at all. It starts in Taiwan. Yes, Taiwan, that island off the coast of China, roughly 5,000 years ago. That's where the ancestors of the people who would eventually settle Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand first pushed their boats into the water. Now, how do we actually know this? Because scientists didn't just guess. They followed three completely separate trails of evidence, and all three led to the exact same place. The first trail is language. Researchers studying languages across the Pacific noticed something almost eerie. Languages spoken from Madagascar, way over on the east coast of Africa, all the way to Easter Island in the far eastern Pacific all belong to the same family. One single family, called Austronesian, containing over 1,200 languages. When linguists traced this language family backward through time, basically rewinding the linguistic clock, every single branch pointed back to one origin, Taiwan and the southern coast of China. Here's a concrete example that really drives this home. The Hawaiian word for sweet potato, kamara, shares roots with words spoken by indigenous tribes in Taiwan today. That's a 5,000-year-old family connection, hidden in plain sight, inside a word for a vegetable. The second trail is DNA, and this one gets juicy. When scientists analyzed the genes of modern Polynesian people, they found two distinct genetic signatures. The first connects them to East Asian populations, those original voyagers from Taiwan and Southeast Asia. But there's a second component, a genetic fingerprint from Papuan peoples in Melanesia. And this is crucial because it tells us the migration wasn't a single straight shot across the Pacific like some kind of ancient speed run. It was a slow, multi-generational journey with stops, settlements, cultural exchange, and yes, intermarriage along the way. Think of it like a relay race that lasted centuries. The third trail is pottery, specifically a distinctive style called lapida where clay pottery decorated with intricate, precise geometric designs. Starting around 3,500 years ago, this pottery shows up in the Bismarck Archipelago near Papua New Guinea and then traces a path eastward like breadcrumbs through the Pacific. Wherever archaeologists dig it up, they know Polynesian ancestors were there. It's the ancient equivalent of someone dropping a GPS pin every few hundred miles. So now we know where they started. But here's the question that haunted researchers for decades. Why would anyone leave? Why would someone look at a perfectly livable island, one with food and shelter and fresh water, and decide to load up a canoe and sail toward nothing? What was driving this? The honest answer is, we don't fully know. But what we do know is that they kept going. Around 3,500 years ago, the Lapita people began moving through Melanesia, planting roots in Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. And then something interesting happened. They stopped. For about 1,000 years, no new islands were settled. Archaeologists actually call this the long pause. And during that pause, something transformative was taking place. These people were perfecting their boats, sharpening their navigation skills, and building a body of ocean knowledge so deep and complex it would eventually allow them to conquer the largest ocean on Earth. Then, around 1,500 years ago, boom, the expansion exploded outward in every direction at once. East to the Society Islands, then to the Marquesas, north from there all the way to Hawaii, roughly 1,200 years ago, but south to New Zealand, which the Maori call Aotearoa, about 1,000 years ago, and finally to Easter Island, the most remote inhabited place on the entire planet, sitting alone in the middle of the Pacific, more than 1,000 miles from the nearest populated land. Now let's pause here, because I want you to really feel what this means. The distance from Tahiti to Hawaii is about 2,400 miles of open ocean. That's roughly the same as flying from New York to Los Angeles, except remove all the land in between and replace it with water. Just water, all the way down. And these voyagers crossed it in double-hulled wooden canoes, packed with families, livestock, and crop seeds, weeks away from any shore. Every single voyage was a gamble with everyone's lives. And they won, over and over again. One of the most powerful proofs that these weren't accidents, that nobody just drifted off course and got lucky, is what archaeologists find when they dig up ancient Polynesian settlements. No matter which island, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island, they find the same exact package of plants and animals: taro, breadfruit, coconuts, yams, chickens, pigs. Even rats came along, probably as stowaways, but the rest? Those were brought on purpose. You don't accidentally pack taro root in a breeding pair of pigs. These were deliberate colonization missions. Planned, prepared, executed. Which brings us to what is honestly the most astonishing part of this entire story, the navigation. Because for a long time, Western scholars flat out refused to believe that Polynesian people could have done this intentionally. The dominant theory, and I want you to understand how arrogant this is, was that they just drifted there, blown off course by storms. Lucky accidents. Pure chance. The idea that these people had sophisticated navigational systems was basically dismissed. Then the 1970s arrived, and everything changed. The skill is called wayfinding. And once you understand what it actually involves, the word sophisticated feels like a massive understatement. Wayfinding uses 0 instruments. No compass, no sextant, no charts. Instead, a master navigator builds a mental model of the entire ocean: stars, waves, birds, clouds, wind, and water, and reads them like a living GPS system that never loses signal. Let's start with the stars. Polynesian navigators memorized the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars throughout the year and constructed what's called a star compass in their minds. They mentally divided the horizon into segments based on where specific stars appear at different times of night, different times of year. Using this internal compass, they could hold a precise bearing across thousands of miles of featureless ocean. It's like having a navigation app installed directly in your brain, one that took years of training to build. But stars only work at night, and only when the sky is clear. So what happens when it's overcast? Or daylight? Here's where it gets really wild. Polynesian navigators could read the ocean itself like a physical map. Deep ocean swells, long, slow waves generated by storms thousands of miles away, travel in consistent directions. When these swells hit an island, they bounce back and create interference patterns in the water. A trained navigator could lie down in the hull of the canoe, feel these subtle patterns through the wood beneath their body, and determine not just that land was nearby, but which direction it was in. From over 100 miles away. Let that sink in. Then there are the birds. Certain seabirds never fly more than a set distance from land. If you spot a tern in the late afternoon flying in a straight, purposeful line, follow it. It's heading home to roost. That bird is your compass. Cloud formations matter, too. Clouds behave differently over land than over open water. A stationary cloud sitting still while everything else drifts past, that cloud is probably anchored over an island. A greenish tint on the underside of clouds. That could be light reflecting up from a lagoon below. Even the water itself carries messages. Changes in color, temperature, and salinity. The presence of certain seaweed. The smell of vegetation on the wind. All of it fed into the navigator's mental model, constantly updated in real time, building a picture of where land was without ever seeing it directly. Now here's the moment this all stopped being theory. In 1975, a traditionally built double-hulled voyaging canoe was launched in Hawaii. The mission, sail to Tahiti and back, 2,400 miles each way, using only traditional Polynesian navigation methods. No GPS, no instruments of any kind. The navigator was Mau Pialug, a master wayfinder from the tiny island of Satawal in Micronesia, one of the very last people alive who had been trained in the ancient art from childhood. On May 1st, 1976, the canoe set sail. 33 days later, it arrived in Tahiti. No instruments, no charts, just the stars, the swells, and Malpielug's extraordinary mind. It was one of the most significant moments in modern understanding of ancient history. It proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Polynesian ancestors didn't stumble across the Pacific. They conquered it, deliberately, skillfully, repeatedly. And just when scientists thought they had the full picture mapped out, the DNA evidence dropped a bombshell that rewrote the story all over again. In 2020, a landmark genetic study revealed something nobody was fully prepared for. Modern Polynesian people carry genetic markers from indigenous South American populations. And the timing of this genetic mixing? Around 1200 AD, centuries before any European ship ever entered the Pacific. Which means Polynesian voyagers didn't just cross the Pacific from west to east. They kept going. They reached South America. They made contact with indigenous peoples, possibly along the coast of what is now Colombia or Ecuador. Some intermarriage happened, and then these voyagers sailed back across the Pacific carrying South American DNA with them. Let that math sink in. A potential round trip of 10,000 miles across open ocean, in wooden canoes, guided by stars and waves. The genetic evidence isn't the only proof, either. Sweet potatoes, a crop that originated in South America, appear in Polynesia long before any European ever arrived in the region. And the Polynesian word for sweet potato, kamara, sounds remarkably close to words for the same plant in certain South American languages. This wasn't a one-time accidental encounter. This looks like repeated contact, ongoing exchange, a trade route across the world's largest ocean that nobody in Europe even knew existed. Let's zoom in on the DNA for a moment, because the precision of the genetic story is genuinely stunning. On the maternal side, the DNA passed from mother to child. Nearly all Polynesians carry a specific genetic marker called the Polynesian motif. Scientists traced this signature backward and found it originated in Taiwan and island Southeast Asia, picking up unique mutations at each stop as these ancient voyagers moved eastward across the Pacific. It's essentially a genetic travel diary written in the human genome. On the paternal side, the story branches. Some genetic lines connect directly to the Amos Aboriginal people of Taiwan, a direct, living link to the original homeland. Others point clearly to Melanesian populations, confirming that significant mixing happened during those centuries in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands. And in 2016, researchers extracted ancient DNA from lapidoskeletons buried in Vanuatu and Tonga, people who lived roughly 3,000 years ago. The result was completely unexpected. These earliest Pacific settlers were almost entirely East Asian in ancestry. Almost no Melanesian DNA at all. This means the Melanesian component we see in modern Polynesians was added later, through a second wave of interaction after the initial settlement. The Polynesian story isn't one migration. It's two chapters, layered on top of each other, written across thousands of years. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about all of this. The Pacific Ocean covers nearly a third of the Earth's surface. It is, by any measure, the most formidable barrier on the planet. And the Polynesian people looked at it and thought, that's where we're going. Not with rockets, not with satellites, not with any of the technology we take for granted today. With knowledge, with courage, with an understanding of the natural world so deep and so complete that they could navigate by feeling the vibrations in the water beneath their feet. We live in an age where most of us can't drive across town without a navigation app. These people crossed 10,000 miles of open ocean using their minds. They settled islands that European explorers, centuries later, would call impossible to find. They grew sweet potatoes in Hawaii that they'd picked up on a casual trip to South America. They built a civilization spread across a third of the planet, connected not by roads or cables, but by ocean highways only they knew how to read. The Polynesians didn't see the Pacific as a barrier. They saw it as home, a vast, living, breathing home that they understood in a way that still humbles scientists today. That's the story, and it deserves to be told again and again, so it's never forgotten. If this grabbed you, If your mind is buzzing the same way mine does every time I dig into this stuff, drop a comment and tell me what hit you hardest. Was it the wayfinding? The DNA discovery? The sheer audacity of sailing to South America and back? I genuinely want to know. And if you want more stories like this, forgotten achievements, ancient mysteries, moments in history that make you question everything you thought you knew, then stick around. We're just getting started. The greatest stories ever told aren't in best-selling novels. They're buried in the ocean floor, written in human DNA, and carved into pottery that's been waiting 3,000 years for someone to find it. Hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.